And then you have to start digging through about what you really believe to be true about God and what does the Bible really say. And you kind of have to give yourself a clean slate and just wipe away everything you've ever heard.
Welcome, everyone, to Reclamation, a beEmboldened initiative. I am Naomi. I'm the founder and the executive director of beEmboldened, and we exist for those impacted by spiritual abuse by providing support for the prevention of victimization and revictimization. We desire to create a safe place to ask the hard questions and to begin healing and rebuilding. It's a rare opportunity that I get to welcome a couple to the podcast to share about their joint story of journeying together through spiritual abuse. But I have that opportunity today. I met Tracy at a conference over the summer and was able to hear some of her personal experience when she got up on stage and just really beautifully and vulnerably shared about what that was like for her. But today I get to hear from her and her husband, Matt, whom I'm meeting for the first time. So I get to hear from them both right along with you, which is great. So to get us started and jump right in, how would you describe the religious system that you were involved with?
So I would say that it didn't fall into the category of a full-on cult. It had a lot of cultish tendencies. And I say that specifically because we were raised in a religious system that overall was called the conservative holiness movement. But my grandfather kind of went off and did this little offshoot church that was non-denominational. And when you have these little non-denominational things where people can kind of do their own thing and make their own rules, it kind of just becomes its own little world within itself. And so if you asked anybody at that church, like, what is your belief system? They would have said conservative holiness movement, but we were non-denominational. We were in our own kind of little bubble. That's where I was raised, in a small little church in the mountains of South Carolina that my grandfather started. Matt's story is a little bit different. His father was a pastor. And
my story is a little bit different because I was a preacher's kid. I still am a preacher's kid.
Yeah,
but
right.
I think the description of an unhealthy church would be the best way to describe it, because of the fact that the word independent was used just aggressively to the point where you just started making up your own rules. It was no longer about a denomination or the
Bible.
The Bible or even the discipline of the denomination. It was about, okay, hang on, what is my thoughts on this, and let's just throw this because this is a personal thing to me. So let me just throw that in and make that a rule, and it becomes very unhealthy. It becomes very unhealthy.
It grows.
Yes.
Yeah,
it does. I hear so often people will share, okay, this is kind of where it started, but then, and I can see in my own story, there's more but then still happening. And so, it continues and people can pivot. And when we have that kind of loosey-goosey approach to scripture, we can come up with all sorts of new revelation and have it mean all kinds of new things depending on what's going on. Yeah. So it sounds like you both were experiencing some of that, although you were in separate environments.
Yes. And we both came from the same type of background. So we're, obviously very familiar with, even though we, obviously lived in different places growing up, we are both very familiar with the same type of people. We had the same type of traveling evangelists that came through and different things like that. So
some of the ministers that would come to revivals at my little grandfather's church would be visiting his father's church, and his family is from the Chesapeake Bay area. And so it kind of created its own system within a system, if that makes sense, of these people who are kind of doing their own thing off to the side of this thing. And this system in and of itself already has some very unhealthy tendencies, right? And so then you've got this, but then, like you just said, of these offshoots, and they create their own system within a system, and it gets really convoluted. And when you're raised in it, that's all you've ever heard. Like from the beginning of time, that is all you've ever heard. For instance, for me, women, you do not wear short sleeves. Like, people do not see your elbow. And you hear that from the beginning of the time as a child, that is a sin. Like, if you do that, that is a sin. You are sinning against God. And so it is it's very difficult to separate when you're getting a little bit older and you're asking questions, and it's difficult to separate all of, like, what's really true. What does God's word really say? Because you've been taught that these things are absolutely, and we understand to be, a willful act against the law of God. And when they're putting all these little things like sleeves,
well, and when you
God.
ask questions, that the sign of the unhealthy church to me was, and still is to this day, when you ask questions, you're immediately rebuked for that. You shouldn't even be asking questions. If you're a true follower of what God is doing in this place, you just do it. You don't ask questions. Well, first of all, we should work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. That's asking questions. That's making sure that you're doing what is right. And then secondly, the answer would be, because that's how we've always done it. That is how we've always done it. Well, I'm not real smart. I'm a kind of a country boy, but that's how we've always done it really doesn't make any sense to me. And I would just say, so is it biblical? Or are we talking traditional? And they would go, well, it definitely has biblical roots, but it's more of, this is the way we do it because that's the way we do it.
But the reality is, a lot of the stuff wasn't the way that they've always done it, because they would add new things in,
exactly.
So like the sleeves had to be here, and then they had to be here, and then they had to be, it just aggressively, it just keeps going and going and going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tradition in and of itself is inadequate. Tradition can be great, but absolutely, I agree with you. And then when it does keep changing, it really isn't even tradition anymore. And I think that's kind of what you're speaking to, Tracy, right? It's like, well, then it changes. Like, this isn't.
And tradition isn't a weapon. Tradition is actually something that should be celebrated. Yes. Like, this is a really cool thing that our family has always done, and this is amazing. It's not beating somebody over the head with it. Like, if you don't do this, you're not a Christian. That's not tradition.
Yes,
I agree. That's not the way it should be.
I grew up around the Amish community, and they have a lot of tradition. And when you ask them about it, they don't. I mean, if you've got 5 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour, they don't mind sharing with you, because that is tradition for them. That is what they do. It hasn't changed in a long, long time. And that is why, the questions in my mind started just coming over and over again, because of the fact of, when you would raise the question, they'd be like, well, that's how we do it. But actually, that's not how you've always done it. Well, yeah, but you shouldn't be asking questions, because this is where God is leading us now, and this is how it is. Well, if it's not going to a place of drawing us closer to God, if it's not going to a place where it's leading people to Christ, if it's not leading us to a place where we're deepening our spiritual roots with God, then it's not a good place to go.
If it's not based in the Bible, if it's not based in the Bible, you can't conclude that something is a sin, but they did that all the time about multiple issues. So, it's just, it's so random is what it is. It's so random, because you have these people up here who just get to say whatever they want to say, and you just have to do it because they said it. So healthy.
Right. I've had some friends kind of joke, and we've joked, but I don't know if it's just a joke. Well, why can't you show your feet, or you can't show well, because someone has a thing for feet. At some point, a leader had a thing for feet, or Tracy, some person had a thing for elbows. It's like, how do you come up with this stuff? And so I'm like, gosh, how does this stuff even come to mind? Just the control, the reaching.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it becomes, if you want to call it a personal conviction, but I just think it's a personal weakness. It's not a personal conviction, because I would hear that a lot. Well, Matt, this is a conviction. No, it's a weakness. Why don't you work that weakness out versus trying to make a rule for everybody? Because it's so your weakness.
Weakness, your weakness is not a problem for them. Oh my goodness, it's wild. It's a wild world,
and it's impossible to know where you're headed in that environment, because you don't know which way we're going to go next. Are we going to go, is it going to be, all dark colors, or are we going to do something? I mean, I can tell you that there was a denomination who split over the fact that both of them agreed that the women all had to wear pantyhose.
Yeah. Women had to have their legs
all
covered.
of them had to have pantyhose and had to be dark pantyhose.
Right.
But one of them said no, pantyhose made the ladies way more attractive, so they made them put a seam down the back of it. Well, the other half said no, the seam down the back of it
makes women's legs attractive.
Makes them more attractive. So they split. And to this day, there is two different denominations their beliefs are identical except for the seam in the pantyhose. And to this day, it's still a thing to this day that they still have the seam and the non-seam. And that is laughable to us now. But I can remember at the time, it was a huge deal. I mean, there was preachers, well, I'm going on the seam side. Well, I'm going on the no seam side. And I look back now and I think, oh, dear God, I can't even imagine how I even survived in that type of environment.
Well, everything is made to be a heaven or hell issue, right? Yes. Like every single thing, down to the seam on your pantyhose. And so when you're in that movement and that's all you've ever heard, and it's ingrained in you. And so you're hearing these things. And I think within all of us, there's this rational root of this just doesn't make sense. But you're so scared to say it because it's presented as a heaven or hell issue. Mm-hmm. And so you wrestle some more within yourself. You do not say these things out loud, because if you say these things out loud, you are going to be called out as a person who is bitter, who is not, going all in for Jesus, who is not fully surrendered to God. And so all of this stuff is going on inside of you and you have no outlet for it. It's just growing and growing. The questions are growing and growing. And that was my childhood, of just a consistent, as I was growing up, the questions becoming more and more. And I would read the Bible. I did read the Bible. I did spend time in the Word. And what I was hearing and what I was seeing didn't make sense to me. And so, but you can't say anything, So, for instance, the verse that they used for no jewelry, we weren't allowed any jewelry, not even a wedding ring. And there's the verse that talks about that, but it says no wearing of gold. And then, the no wearing of garments is mentioned in the same verse. And so if you're going to take this part of the verse of no wearing of gold and make that all jewelry, whether it's bronze, silver, gold, whatever, if you're going to make that the guideline, but the very next verse talks about garments, and you're going to totally ignore that. It just didn't make sense in my mind. But you can't say that. You cannot say that. You have all of these things that are stirring up inside of you that are consistently growing that you can't say out loud. And then in my situation, I was from a very dysfunctional family. And though we looked very conservative on the outside and very holy and all the things, we met all the checklists of doing all the things right. There were things in my house that were not good. And we had a lot of secrets in my house. And so you've got all of that stirring up with all of these questions. And it just becomes, it's a volcano internally that is just brewing and brewing and brewing.
Yeah. And I think for me, my household was actually great. I have a lot of brothers and sisters.
He's from a family of 9 siblings, y'all. 9 siblings, okay?
My parents were genuine. I've learned a lot from my dad. Was very close with my parents. And I look back and realize that my parents were saved into an environment that was healthy. And they just wanted to.
They just want to love Jesus.
They just wanted to go with people that just love God, and they were unable to see that some of these people were out to manipulate and everything like that. And I look back and I see just a period of time where my parents,
it was gradual.
Over time walked with them into some of these environments, and it changed the whole dynamic of our childhood. It changed the whole dynamic of who we were, and none of it for the better. I mean, really, none of it for the better. I have younger brothers that, that still struggle to this day with does God really love them? Does God even really exist?
God even real? Right.
Because of what they saw through that manipulation, not necessarily from mom and dad. It's interesting how they still strive to be the very best they could be, but they just listened to the wrong voices.
They were in the wrong environment.
We have a saying: you listen to the wrong voices, you'll make the wrong choices. and I see that, and they did, and
definitely impacted your family. So I think the difference between us is I was born and raised in this, right? His dad didn't get saved until right after Matt was born. And so his parents grew into this over time. They got saved. They wanted to love Jesus, and then they got connected with these people. And, if you really love Jesus, you'll do this. And they're all in. They want to love Jesus, right? And so they start doing this thing. And then before you know it, they're pulled into this and this and this. So his family was a gradual pull, I think, into where we both ended up, which was in this kind of non-denominational outlier set that was its own thing within a thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can just tell you a story about my mother. I was probably 1 at the time. My parents had only been saved a short amount of time, and they went to a camp, and the evangelist noticed my mother had a wedding band on, and he come up to her. He said, "Well, are you saved?" And she said, "Well, yes, of course I'm saved." And he said, "Well, if you were truly saved, you wouldn't have that wedding band on. And I'm just here to tell you that you have to get that off." And so she took it off, and she put it in her dresser drawer. And I can remember growing up, and every once in a while, she would let us look at this wedding band. And I always thought it was so fascinating that my mother had this wedding band in her dresser drawer. And it wasn't until I was probably in my 20s, maybe even early 30s, and she finally threw it away. Somebody convinced her enough that she had to throw it away. And my mother's passed now, but I've always wanted to ask her, did you truly feel like you had to do that, or did you just finally give in to the pressure? But the fact is that somewhere she knew that was silly, that this was something that Dad had given to her. He worked hard and bought this for her, and she didn't want to part with it. She was willing to part it off her finger because she didn't want to make her husband look bad, and she didn't want to not fit in. But she didn't want to part with it totally. And finally, somebody found out that she had it 20 years later or more, and and she finally had to part with it completely. She had to throw it out. And I just think that those kind of stories are so sad to me because, she felt not spiritually led, but she felt manipulated and felt like she had to do something against what she believed. And therefore that led us as her children into that same type of environment.
But I don't think that she would have been able to give verbiage to that. Like, we can look at it and see how she felt manipulated. But if you would have spoken to her right before she died and said, "Why did you take that ring off?" She would have told you, "God told me to take it off." We look at the story and we see that this man approached her and said, "You have to take it off." But that shows you how it works in your mind over time until you can come from this reality of somebody telling you have to do that. And then it becomes, "God told me to do that."
Well, an unhealthy environment.
There's no separation.
Thing where,
right.
That's true.
Mm-mm.
So while each of you, well, first I'm going to ask one clarification question just about kind of the structure. So it's non-denominational, but it really is this denomination. So did the denomination, the Conservative Holiness, does it have a structure? Like if I were to think of like Southern Baptist or Episcopal, does it have like an authority structure? So they stepped out from under that?
It is its own umbrella. Okay. So think of an umbrella, and underneath this umbrella are several distinct denominations within the Conservative Holiness movement. You've got the two denominations who split over the pantyhose, but they fall within this belief system, but they have this division of thought over this issue, right? And so they separated. They're under there. There's how many? I mean, there's multiple denominations underneath this umbrella, okay? And it all started from the same place, and it all became these separate entities because of issues, little issues. They disagreed about this standard, These people were not being strict enough, so they pulled away and did their own thing, and they created their own denominations underneath this umbrella. The difference with my grandfather is he split away and he didn't create his own denomination within the conservative holiness movement. He just had his own church. It was its own thing. He didn't try to grow that and expand that and make an entire denomination out of it. It was totally separate into itself, really. And so you've got the conservative holiness movement. You've got very distinct belief systems within that started all from the same place, but they split from one another over little, pantyhose issues. And then you've got the little churches that kind of split away from that even. And they're their own thing, completely separate. They're not a denomination, but they're just kind of church unto themselves under this umbrella.
Yeah, okay. And if you want to go way back, it started. The main denomination was it was called the Pilgrim Holiness Church. That it was a denomination, and then you have like Wesleyan, Nazarene, that kind of were offshoots from that. And then during that time, right, the offshoot of the Wesleyan and the Nazarene denominations, where my dad was actually with the Wesleyan Church. That's when when he went into the ministry. That's what he pastored the Wesleyan Church for many, many years. And then he felt like they weren't strict enough. So he actually pulled out and went with a much more conservative denomination. And but yes, that's kind of the umbrella. If you want to,
it's a branch that you could. It's kind of like a family tree, really. You've got all of these, and you could chart it out on paper. You got this one big thing of what they used to be, and then they became this, and then it charts down, and you've got this, and then you end up over here where my grandfather was, where just this one little entity unto itself kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it sounds like because it was a movement, it wasn't like a convention or something like we might think of again with some denominations now. There wasn't any authority over. So, for example, your grandfather didn't have someone to answer to. He's doing his own thing.
No.
Okay.
Completely doing his own thing.
Yeah.
Now, the denominations that exist in that, they do have their own rule books, their own things that the ministers have to do to, be ordained, their own disciplines, there are versions of that there where there is some accountability within those organizations. Those organizations do exist within the conservative holiness movement, but my grandfather was not that.
Got it. Okay.
No.
So while the two of you
and your dad wasn't that towards the end. His dad was independent at the end.
He still pastors a little church, and it's totally independent unto itself. So it's its own thing. He kind of makes his own. Well, he doesn't just kind of make. He does. so like just to show you, just to give you an example. Even though I am a pastor, I could never preach on my dad's platform. And the reason being, first of all, because I have a computer. We're right here on this right now.
His dad does not believe in computers.
And then I had a wedding. I have a wedding band, and you can't.
And you're wearing short sleeves. And, my goodness, you were breaking all kinds of rules over here. I don't even know I'm in the room with you.
One of the saddest things my mother ever said to me was, she goes, "Matt, I would love to hear you preach." She said, "I wish some other church in this area would call you for a revival so I could come hear you preach." And it was just very sad to me. I wasn't sad for myself. I actually felt bad for them, because when you live under that kind of condemnation every single day of your life, that is a burden that nobody should have to bear. That is a burden that she had to carry to her grave. And I always felt bad for her. I said, "Well, Mom," I said, "it's a decision I had to make for me and my family, and that's a decision that you and Dad had to make many years ago, and you're still keeping to that." And I said, "I know you love me. I love you, and we're just going to keep moving forward like that. But we're just going to choose to realize that I am not following those rules just to make you feel better, and I'm not going to do that. I not only think it's silly, but I think it's toxic to try to enforce something that you don't really believe yourself."
When the two of you think back, how did you view God while you were still involved?
So,
who was he?
I never doubted that there was a God. I'm not And I've had a lot of friends who've like grew up with me and they've totally left the church and they don't have anything to do with it anymore. And they're not even sure, like, is God even real? Does he exist? I never had that question. Like, does God exist? I've always felt that he was real. I just felt within myself that there was no way that he could love me. I just firmly felt there was no way that he could love me. It always, a real, authentic, wholesome relationship with him always felt kind of like a carrot at the end of a stick, and it's just dangling out here. And if you could just do this one more thing, or you could just pray a little bit more, just read the Bible a little bit more, make your sleeves a little bit longer, or make your dress a little bit longer, or, say that you're not going to, do this little thing or that little thing. And you just keep doing all of these things, but it doesn't fill that gap. And so I felt like he was unattainable. And if he's God, he can do anything, right? And so if he's unattainable to me, he's made himself unattainable to me. There's no hope for me. He doesn't love me. And then, of course, you have to remember that I was dealing with all of the secret stuff that was going on within me, too. That was, and you have these conflicting things happening. Just hit the microphone. You have these conflicting things that are happening because you have these people who are telling you that, you can't wear short sleeves because that could create some kind of sexual feelings in some man if he sees your elbow. And then you've got these very same people over here doing very not good things. Okay. And it's just wild inside of my own mind. It's just a huge disparity within your own mind of these people saying this thing to you and making you live by these rules. And then secretly, there's this whole other thing going on. And it was mind blowing for me. And again, remember, can't talk about any of this stuff. So it's just stirring up in me for years, stirring up in me. Yeah.
And the two of you met still in it, right?
Yes.
You were both still. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah,
so his father was a pastor and my grandfather was a pastor. And I've lived like from the beginning of time. I was born and raised in the mountains of South Carolina, but he was from the Chesapeake Bay area and his dad pastored churches all throughout that area for his whole life, even to this day, except for just this one little segment of time for 5 years or so. Mm-hmm. His dad took a church in South Carolina. And so they moved down to South Carolina, and his dad's church was its own little independent thing. And my grandfather's church was its own little independent thing. But our youth groups would get together from time to time and do things together. And so that is how I met him. My brother became his best friend. And so I was the naggy little sister who was, hanging on all the time when they were hanging out. And I would go with my brother sometimes over to his house. And then Matt would come to our house, to visit my brother. And so that's how we met. And he's 2 years older than me, and he didn't pay me one bit of attention. I just had this big old crush on him, and he did not want to have anything to do with me. And I wasn't that girl who was like clingy. Those girls are like throwing themselves at the boys all the time, always writing them little notes and, trying to just hang on them and all that. I was not that. But I did have a crush on him. And how did you even know that I had a crush on you? Somebody had to have told you because I didn't.
I think your brother did, I think.
But he didn't want to have anything to do with me. He wasn't mean, but he just was, there was that little hand up. And so let me tell you a cute story. Okay. I want to tell you a cute story. How Matt and this is the beginning of Matt and Tracy right here. Okay. Our youth groups were together for a hayride, and we're in South Carolina, right? So we're like doing a real hayride. We're not hooked to a tractor, going around a farm. We've got a big old long, how long was that trailer? We hooked to the back of a huge truck, and it's full of hay, and we're going all through the mountains of South Carolina in this truck bed or long bed full of hay. And so, and I'm a cold natured person. Like I'm always cold, always cold. And I wear a sweater in the house if it's 72 degrees and I'm just always cold. And so being in the mountains of South Carolina at night in this hayride, I was freezing. And I looked over at my best friend and I said, I cannot believe I didn't bring gloves. My hands are freezing. And Matt was sitting like 2 people down from me. And he looked at me and he said, give me your hands. I'll keep them warm for you. And I was like, oh. At first, I was really offended. I was really offended at first because I thought he was just teasing me. And he had never teased me about the crush I had on him. Like, he had never brought it up. And I thought, he's being mean. Like, he's teasing me in front of everybody at my crush. And so I didn't say anything. I didn't respond to him. I just looked over at my friend, and inside I was feeling all hurt, thinking he's teasing me in front of all these people about my crush on him. And like 30 minutes later, my friend and I were talking, and I mentioned something again about my hands being cold, and he looked at me again and he said, "Give me your hands. I'll keep them warm for you." And I looked at him and realized he was serious. And so I scooted down next to where he was, and I gave him my hands, and he put them inside of his jacket, and we've been together ever since.
Oh my goodness, that is so sweet.
I don't know what changed your mind.
32 years.
It's been 32 because we dated for 2 years, and we've been married 30 years last month, or July of this year. We were married 30 years, and we dated for 2 years. So we've been together 32 years.
I can tell you were talking about, your view of God. The great thing was my dad really loved my mother. Like,
he did.
Truly loved my mother.
They had a really healthy relationship.
While they made some goofy decisions, more than goofy decisions, about some things when it come to church, their love for each other was so amazing that is what helped guide me. I talk to my brothers. We talk all the time. We talk every day. And, we talk about all the craziness, but we also bring up the fact that he was a great example for us for how much he loved our mother. And so,
he did love her
therefore,
really well.
Like with Tracy, I knew she liked me, but I'm like, you know what? No, if I'm going to like somebody, I'm going to be all in. So that's why I was hesitating, because I'm like, you know what? I don't want to mess this up. And you got to also remember that I am dealing with, do I want to get out of this? Because it was funny at the time. Actually, I was thinking about going into radio broadcasting. It's funny, we're sitting here behind a mic, and that's what I was thinking about. And I can remember that even that night, I was thinking, you know what? If I start dating her, then I'm probably going to have to stay here. I'm not going to be able to go to the Atlanta School of Broadcasting. I'm a kid, so I'm thinking about all these things. And then what is that going to mean for the rest of my life if I can, get away from this type of church, and all of that. And so I was weighing all that in my mind, but in the back of my mind, knowing that the example that I had before me with my parents, what was beautiful between the two of them. And so I have always strived to live that out, to love my wife. And that means making good decisions for our family. That was hard
Right.
for leaving them, because we were actually in our late 30s, right? When we finally decided
when we walked
to step
away
out.
completely.
Yep.
When we walked away completely, we had a version of walking away when we were younger. And I'll say this: when I married Matt, like, I loved him as much as a broken girl could love somebody, which is to say, not very much. I really wanted an out. He was my out to get out of my house. And of course, in this particular movement, that just has bright future written all over it, doesn't it? Just he was my bright future right there. Oh my goodness. So much good. Oh my goodness. Within our movement also, we heard a lot of teaching from preachers about the fact that women, you're supposed to get married and have babies, and you're supposed to take care of your house, and that's what women do. And there was a lot of preaching around that kind of content. And of course, I was still in the point of striving, just wanting to do everything I possibly could to get it right. So marriage was another, like, checkbox. I'm a woman. I'm supposed to, get married and have babies, and all these things please God. And so that was a part of the checkbox. It was a part of an out for me to get out of my house. So I married really, really young. I actually graduated from school when I was 16. I turned 17 that summer and got married 6 days after I turned 17. And he was 19. So we were babies. We were just little babies. I look at that now. When my kids were 17, I looked at them and thought about them getting married, and it blew my mind. Hey, what in the world? But that is what happened. And so married at a young age. And his family moved back up to the Chesapeake Bay area, and we attended my grandfather's church. That was the expectation as family. And there's a lot of conversation when you're in those movements about this being like the one true way, and this is the one true church, and this is the one true, and you've been told this your whole life. And so there's a lot of emotional control going on there, because you feel like when you walk away from churches like this, you do not feel like you're just walking away from a church. You feel like you're walking away from God. And so it's really hard to take that step. But you have to remember too, secrets, all these secrets, stuff that Matt didn't even know. And we were married. And so it came to the boiling point with my grandfather's church in particular when I was 21 years old, which means you would have been 23. I just had my second baby. And I just literally felt nauseous when we would pull into the church parking lot. Just physically, a physical feeling of, I want to throw up. I don't want to be here. And I look back now and realize that I was probably on the verge of a nervous breakdown, having panic attacks and things like that. But I would have had no language for that because they did not talk about mental health. Every issue that you had was, you're just feeling that way because you're not praying enough. You're just thinking that way or feeling that way. But you have anxious, thoughts because you're not reading the Bible enough. You're not doing enough. And it was always, you're not doing of all this little checklist thing. There was no conversation around mental health at all. If you would have said panic attack to me, I wouldn't have even known what you were talking about. And so I had no context to understand what was happening to me. I just knew that I felt like I could not walk back in the doors of that church. It just reached this boiling point of, I cannot do this. And so we were actually sitting in the church parking lot in our little white Grand Am. And I was like, I can't do this. And he looked at me and he said, you know what your family's going to do, right? And that's the reason he had stayed for so long, because he knew for my sake, like what was going to happen on the other side of us leaving that church. And he didn't know if I could handle it. And so he asked me, you know what your family's going to do, right? And I said, yeah, I do. I said, but I cannot walk back in the doors of that church. And we pulled out of that parking lot and we never ever went back. And so this was our first step in leaving. And so we left this really rigid, high control, non-denominational conservative holiness church. And we went into one of the denominations that I mentioned to you before. And there's a spectrum here within the holiness movement, right? You've got these people over here really, really, really strict. And you've got these people over here who wear short sleeves. I mean, short sleeves. And they wear sandals. They show their toes. And they just there's this, and these people talk about how worldly these people are all the time. And I had grown up my whole life hearing about how these people were walking away from the one true way, right? And so we went to a church that fell within that conservative holiness umbrella, but it allowed things that I still remember to this day the very first pair of sandals that I ever bought. I was 21 years old when I bought my first pair of sandals. And I remember every single detail about those shoes. I can tell you everything about them. And when I tell people that, they're like, that is crazy. You remember your first pair of sandals? Like they got sandals when they were infants, their moms put little sandals, when they were little babies, they had these cute little sandals. And it's wild to them that I actually remember every single detail about that. But so this wasn't a complete exit from that movement, but it was a huge step for us from the extremely rigid, high control environment that we had been in. A huge, huge, huge step. Mm-hmm. And I will say at this point for me, continuing in church was more for my kids than me. If it would have just been me, I think I would have just never went back to church again. Not that I didn't believe in God, not that I didn't want to know him, but I just felt like there was no hope for me. But the thing that I wanted most was to have a relationship with God, right? And if it's the thing that I want the most and I feel like I can't have it, but maybe my kids can have it. Maybe my kids can have it. We had 2 little boys at that time. And so that was the reason that I even stayed connected to church at all, is because of my kids. I can't speak to you in that moment of what you were thinking.
No, I knew that we had to do something. I knew that the toxic level of the environment we were in had to be changed. And I also knew the toll that it had already taken on us as a young couple. It's hard enough, just having a marriage and
Babies.
yeah,
And we were
stepping into
babies.
life. We were young,
Right.
but having that kind of environment where you know that you have to live up to every stand. If you don't, and it's not about it wasn't even about being spiritual. It was about putting on that good look. It was about making sure that everybody saw, this right thing. And so moving into that, I've just always wanted a deeper relationship with Christ. Always. I remember at 12 years old, I gave my life to Christ, and that's what have always wanted. And I was like, I know in this environment, I'm not doing. I know I'm.
This
I
isn't
know
it.
that
isn't
this
it.
can't be what God has for us. I know it's not, because we're not reaching the lost. We're not. There's nothing there. It's us for no more. The
Mentality, right?
when your life verse is "Few there be that find it," and you find like joy in that. And we would hear that.
Yeah,
The
we were
reason
the
there's not
few.
many people in this church is because few there be that find it. If there's a lot of people, you're on the wrong. If you go to a church and it's packed, you know that something is wrong. You know that they're preaching a watered down gospel. And I was like, pretty sure Jesus preached to thousands at a time. I'm pretty sure that's not right. And so just knowing that in my mind, and again, I thank God for the seeds of truth that were planted in my life early on from not only just well-meaning people, but people who love God and love people. And that is what held me steady, even through going through that, because I knew it'd be, and we were ostracized. We were, it was horrible. It was not a fun time at all for us. But
Well, so you have to understand that everything is a sin, right? You don't go to movies, you don't go to ball games, you don't go to carnivals, you don't go to fairs, you don't go bowling, you don't do. Everything's a sin, and so you don't do anything except for your social interaction with your church family. That is your whole world. Everything outside of that is wrong. And so your world is so small and so confined, and they had their own school. And so you didn't, everything, every single thing about my life was rooted in that church. I had no social circle outside of that church. I had no anything. It was just, it's very confining. So when you walk away, you're literally walking away from your whole life. And you have to start from the ground up. It's a lot. It's a big step. It's terrifying. It's a terrifying step to take.
It is. And the two of you did this together. And now I know I did hear some of your story again already, Tracy, but I think anyone, listening to this or watching this may think, gosh, yeah, they got to do it together. For anyone else who's done it together might be thinking, they had to go through this together. And there can be a both and there, how we would say it. And so if I may ask, you two are still sitting here together today and you're fully out, you've had a complete shift in your worldview. But as you were going through that transition together in these phases and being so young yourselves, may I ask, how bad did it get?
Ooh.
Yeah, it got bad. It really did. It got to the point where
he was in a hotel.
I was in a hotel because I
was at home with
I couldn't take it, because the problem is when you leave an environment like that, but you don't even know what to do with it. You don't know what to do with the bitterness and the anger
and you don't know what's really true.
No,
and what's really right.
So you're all over the place. And the church we attended, great people. We still have friends from there to this day. They tried their best, bless their heart. They had never seen nothing like this, because they were like, what in the world, And,
well, they may have seen something like this. I have no idea. We don't know what they experienced, but it was just a new experience for us.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And when you start digging into, what is really true and what is really right and who God really is, and you start getting down into your stuff, it gets into your stuff, right? And I had secrets. And so, and there was one piece of the story that I'll share that had a huge impact on our marriage. And it was the fact that I developed just gradually over time until it got like pretty severe, some pretty severe OCD tendencies, particularly around my floors. I cleaned all my floors every single day on my hands and knees with a with a water bucket and a rag because a mop just spread germs around. In my mind, there was no mopping. It was going to be, and I did it at least twice a day. And then anything that could be vacuumed was vacuumed at least once a day, but probably more like 2 or 3 times a day. And I was just, everything had to be clean, but I was particularly like the floors in my house. And it was a fixation. And I realize now that it's because there were so many things that had happened in my life that had been out of my control, and so many things about my life that I did not understand. And there was just so many things that were just so wild, right? There was one thing that I could control, and that was how clean my floors were. And I needed that level of control to feel sane because so much in my life felt so disjointed and just wild within my own head. And so I got crazy about the floors. And Matt would be sitting there at the table eating dinner, and I would have the little handheld vacuum cleaner vacuuming underneath the chair while he was eating because some crumbs may have fallen down. And so this kind of stuff was going on in addition to, just we're young, we have 2 babies. We've just made a huge life transition out of, an environment that really is your whole environment. And so you're building everything again. And all of these things are big things, right? And so it's just difficult times are revealing. Difficult times are revealing. And so then at some point, Tracy has to talk about the things that have happened, right? And so it was yucky. It was just like a really yucky season. And I will say that the church that we were in, I feel like that God specifically wanted us there because of the pastor and his wife that was at that church, because they said the things that we needed to hear in that season. They did. And that pastor's wife loved me so good. I mean, she was so precious and tender towards me, and she would share pieces of her personal journal. Like she would copy it and she would send it to me and let me see it. She had lost her father at a young age in an accident. So she had grown up without a father figure. And because of that, she had had a lot of struggle in the beginning of her faith journey with trusting God. And so she talked at length about this stuff within her private journals, about her process of coming to trust God. And she shared all of that with me, just very openly and vulnerably, if this is what she had went through in her mind, and this is what she had been thinking and feeling. And of course, that's exactly where I was at. I didn't trust God at all. I didn't think that He loved me. I didn't think there was a possibility for me to have a relationship with Him. And so the fact that she was just so vulnerable with me and so open with her own process of coming to understand that God is trustworthy had a huge impact on me. And she developed relationship with me. And for the first time in my life, I told somebody things I had never said out loud before. And her response was just to love me. Mm. And I thought, if she can know everything there is to know about me and still love me, there may be the chance that God could do the same. And that was the very first time in my life that opened up, like that idea that God could love me. I could be in real relationship, like real healthy relationship with Him. And that was new. That was a new thought process for me, because I had been over here in this completely like, that's unattainable. I can't have that. It's not for me. It's not going to happen. And that was life changing for me. Life changing for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think during that process, seeing her to be able to trust somebody, because I think she loved me the best that she could, but because of her relationship with her parents, her father in particular, there was no trust there. So I don't feel like because of the environment we were in, that she wasn't able to even share with me. And that was my frustration, was like, I know there's problems here, but we can't continue on just scrubbing floors. We've got to be able to move forward. What in the world can we do? And I didn't know what to do. I'm just trying to, I'm like, okay, wear a bracelet. What would Jesus do? What in the world, what can we do here? But the truth is, when we were both able to trust somebody, I realized that in an unhealthy church environment, you are much more apt to keep secrets, because that's the only way that you can survive in that type of environment. It's like, okay, if I don't tell nobody, I can get away with this little thing. I mean, you have to realize it was an environment where they would preach against reading the Reader's Digest. So you would have to sneak. I'm not lying, sneak to read the Reader's Digest. So if that's the case, then that's a secret. Oh my goodness, no, I don't get the Reader's Digest. No, my neighbor does, and I go over there and read it. I pay for it so the neighbor can get it. But so seeing her being able to open up to her, and that helped me to to be able to open up to our pastor there.
Well, there was
it really
like when
started to
he
change.
when he went to the hotel and told me he wanted a divorce, that was huge, because divorce was a huge
Yes.
sin within these church. Like, you did not even use the word divorce. You did not say that. And so when he said that he was done, it blew my mind, really, because you didn't even, like I said, that wasn't a word you even used. And I'm just sitting at home with these two kids with my mind blown that, this is even happening. And then obviously realizing if we're going to find a way forward, some things have to change. Like, something has to change. It can't be the way that it was. And so, yeah, I'm over here and, and he's over here having conversations with the pastor of the church, and his wife's loving me, and the pastor is talking to Matt. And he said something that totally flipped Matt's mindset within this whole situation. He said, "Matt, you realize that she's been waiting for this, right? Like, she's been waiting for you to do this, because everything in her history has taught her that men will always hurt her. And you are just doing what she expected you to do. Now you have to do the unexpected thing." And something about that challenge, or that phrasing of, this is what she expects. You have to do the unexpected thing. Just keep loving, keep caring, keep fighting for your marriage. And something about that flipped a switch in his mind, and he decided he was going to do the unexpected thing.
Well,
keep loving and fighting.
Yeah, I think for the first time I'd actually heard a healthy bit of advice. I'd heard something that actually made sense. It wasn't, well, this,
you just need to pray more.
If you and Tracy would just, if you would allow the Holy Spirit just to move. And I told you, if you started wearing short sleeves, this is what would happen. I mean, seriously, those kind of conversations, we have heard those conversations. And so to hear someone actually using true, healthy mental health advice that could help me step into a better season, it did. It was like a light bulb moment for me. And I'm like, you know what? No. I am going to do that. And I'm sure, and not sure, I know that watching my dad love my mother, it played into that. Even though my poor dad and mom, I'll never forget the day I called them and said, listen, Trace and I, it's bad. We may not be able to reconcile this. And poor dad, he was like, well, son, we'll definitely be praying. Definitely be praying. He didn't know what he didn't give me. No, I'm like, Dad, come on, this is your moment. Give me some advice. But he didn't, because you just didn't talk about that. That talking about divorce or separation wasn't even part of the conversation.
So most people didn't know how to respond.
No, he didn't. So.
He definitely had his. You had your foot out the door more than your foot. I think you had only your pinky toe was still inside. Everything else was still outside. You were on your way out the door. And something about that conversation flipped something inside of his mind. And he decided that he wanted, for us to work towards it. Obviously, a crisis moment like that, you realize something has to change. Mm-hmm. And so that's when you start digging into all of your history and the things that are uncomfortable to say and all of your secrets. And then you have to start digging through about what you really believe to be true about God, and what does the Bible really say. And you kind of have to give yourself a clean slate and just wipe away everything you've ever heard, because everything you've ever heard has had some, twisting or turning of things to manipulate a theology that is just so far outside of what is actually true. You have to just completely wipe that slate clean and start from the beginning. Like, who is God? Is he real? What is the Bible? Can it be trusted? And just build a foundation of faith from the ground up. And so that's kind of where we were at that crisis moment.
And I will say, coming out of that, I feel like it gave us both a confidence to be able to say, you know what, if it's not biblical, we're actually not going to just allow somebody to steamroll us over with that. And we're going to live by truth. We're going to live by biblical truths. And I think that was a turning point for us to go, you know what, if our families, don't like it, that's their loss. We don't really, it's not that we don't care, but we understand that we have to do what is right according to the Bible, not according to what they think is right for us.
It does cement some things in your mind. You have to reach that point where you lay aside everything that you're hearing. Lay aside everything that you're hearing, because you're hearing, like, I got a letter in my mailbox that told me that I was going to hell, that my children were going to go to hell, and that their blood was going to be on my hands because I had made the decision to leave the church that I had grown up in. So that's the kind of stuff that you're hearing, and you're wrestling with that in your mind. Like, am I really going to hell? What is, I guess I am going to hell because God doesn't love me. And so you literally have to lay every bit of the things that you've heard down, from the teaching that you've heard, from the criticism, from all of it. And you just have to start building your own faith, building your own thing. And it takes a lot of courage to do that, to make that step. And it takes a lot of tenacity, because that's not a one-step process. You're hearing consistently those things in your head that you've been told, and you consistently have to lay them down. Yeah, and how you lay them down is through the Word of God, because if it doesn't align with the Word, it gets laid down, right? It becomes the ruler that everything is measured by. And that's where we went, to the Word of God.
And in that laying down, there's also, I hear you both speaking about it, especially you, Tracy, when you reference the secrets that you had, there's also this laying down of the facade that we're holding on to. And it's not a facade that we have for no good reason, right? We have it because we're terrified, and we were taught to be terrified. So we came by it honestly. It was fair to have it. And yet I can think back to different conversations I've had with people where I've just had to say, this makes me look really ugly right now, but it's the truth of where I'm at. And if I'm not honest about that, it's just going to fester, and we're not going to get anywhere. And so I've had to say some really self-incriminating things at points to people, including my spouse at times, where I'm like, this is going to, I look bad, and it is bad, but this is the reality of it. And taking that risk on, you know what? And I think I just hit this point. I don't know when. I mean, I hit it in phases depending on the relationship. But I remember hitting these points of, well, you know what? The Bible said God knows my heart anyway. So what on earth am I bothering? This is taking so much energy.
Right.
What am I doing it for? He already knows. So is it really that I'm going to be damned because I actually said it, or is I going to be damned because I actually felt it? I mean, why not go ahead and say it? And then maybe it won't stay true. Maybe I'll be able to move on and be somewhere else because I want to be somewhere else.
Yeah, I think looking back, it's funny now. It wasn't funny at the time, but I really feel like both of our families were like totally embarrassed because we were struggling. Now, if we did the breakdown, there was a whole lot of struggling going on in the families, but nobody knew about it because they kept it hidden. Where Tracy and I were like, okay, Trace a little more than me, let's go ahead and just air this thing out. And but that's the way she had to process it. And I was just trying to work through it in my own way. But it wasn't until we were just both honest and brutally honest, like you say, ugly, and it's just it's just messy. And you're like, you know what? I'll probably never be accepted in any church. It doesn't matter what type it is. I may have to totally change religions here. I'm not sure, but at the end of the day, it is freeing as well, because you understand it is no longer about me. Here I'm just laying everything before God.
Hostage. You're not hostage to the secrets.
And you don't have anything to hide. And I think there's something freeing about that. And I feel like so many people who are struggling from coming out of that type of thing, they never allow that point to get to their life. They stop. We have friends that we know that are almost there, but they won't really get truly honest and just let it out because they're so afraid of what family and friends that, we have them tell us to this day, you don't understand. We're going to lose our entire life. We're not as strong as you. We're not as strong as you. I'm like, you're an amazing person. Why in the world would you allow yourself to be trapped for 20, 30, 40 years in something that you don't even believe in whatsoever, all for the sake of making somebody else feel better? When in reality, your children are looking at you going, why are you living a hypocritical lifestyle? Why are you, saying and doing things that you don't even believe? And we just decided we're not doing that anymore. And we were like, our marriage is pitiful right now anyway. So let's just go ahead and just be honest about this whole thing and move forward. And I truly believe that is the pivotal moment when we not only started building our marriage back, but building both of our relationship with God back. That I truly believe that was a defining
well,
moment.
for me, it was where I started a healthy relationship with God for the very first time in my life. And
something else the two of you spoke to that just, gosh, really hits me. It's so true. Y'all reached out, like Matt, you said you talked to your dad and he was kind, it sounds like in the phone call, but just, this, we don't talk about it. And so because we don't talk about it, we also don't give support. We don't actually disciple. We don't actually come alongside. We don't do these very biblical things that we're instructed to do. And we're instructed to do them because we as humans need them, right? Like it's in there for a reason. We need that. We need that sense of community. We need that support. We need that wisdom from people who have come before us. And so when we're in this position of, gosh, if I tell people this, I'm going to lose people. One, yeah, you probably will. And we don't say that callously. We say that with the pain of people who have lived it. And so, yeah, these aren't just unfounded fears. They're very real fears that very well may come to fruition. Now, sometimes we're surprised and they don't all come to fruition. And that is a beautiful thing when it happens. And yet, when we are honest and we're able to say what's really going on with us, even though the people that we want to support us maybe don't, and that is heartbreaking and we grieve that, we do find that there are other goodnesses that pop up along the way and they help us forward. They help keep us with our heads above water. We don't quite drown. And I know that still doesn't sound great, right? I don't know if you guys resonate with that, where I'm like, it's not like I was just floating above the water, sunning myself. No, I didn't quite drown. My nose was just enough above. I didn't quite drown.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I came more and more out of the water. Yes. And then it continues, right? Yes. It continues to get better from there.
That's right. Yeah.
But gosh, for anyone,
day just gets better. Yep.
Yeah, for anyone though out there who is like, man, I don't say my questions because I don't think they'll be taken seriously, or I think I'll be judged for them, or I think in the circle you're in, that might be true. That's a concern though. Let's look for a different circle where you can be honest with your questions and your concerns, because they warrant an answer. And scripture tells us to be ready to give one.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the beauty of this kind of ministry existing, is that it gives a place for people to ask questions that they maybe wouldn't necessarily ask in their circle because they know it's not safe there, which is a huge red flag right there. People aren't saying things because they're scared. And it's not because they're scared of God. They're scared of people. They're scared of how their family's going to react, what their so-called friends are going to say, and if they're going to lose all of that. It's all, people are not sitting back in the corner most of the time going, oh my goodness, I'm so scared of God right this minute. There is a factor of that. Like that's a real thing. They create this whole fear of God, like overlooking every detail of your life. And if you get anything wrong, he's standing up there with a whip to whip you back into shape. But when you ask people what they're scared of in these conversations, they're scared of their family, scared of what their family's going to say, scared of what their family's going to do. And that's never a good thing.
Well,
never a good thing. And so I will just say, like, that's what I was going to say, was that's the beauty of this kind of ministry. And I wish that these kinds of things had existed whenever we were walking this path, because I feel like it would have made it a whole lot easier if we would have had some sort of resource. We were figuring this out on our own, and thank God that we navigated it and got, where we needed to go. But man, it would have been really nice to have a podcast or a web page that I could just send a message going, this is what I'm thinking and feeling. Am I crazy? And for somebody to say back to me, you're not crazy. You're okay. You're okay.
Well, we might be a little crazy. But I do think the very thing that we fear is isolation.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't move, but yet
and we're isolated in our fear.
We have allowed the enemy to isolate us, even in the very place where we don't want to feel isolated. So we're still around our family, but yet we start to resent them. We start to have bitterness toward them. We start to have anger building up because we know this is not healthy. We know this is not where we need to be, but we use it like a crutch, and we have to. So I don't want to say anything, and I just think it's so sad that so many people that want to live a different lifestyle, that want to draw closer to God through a biblical lifestyle, are today feeling isolated, even in their own movement, because they don't know what to do. And I just feel like that's a horrible place for the enemy to keep people, and that's what we felt. And even though it was extremely lonely on the other side, like you said, there were some right voices that spoke into our life, because guess what? We cleared out all the bad voices. I mean, think about it. When you step away, it clears them out, buddy. So it gave us an opportunity to listen to new voices, because for so many years we only had certain voices speaking into our life. And I'm telling you, if you're struggling, it's probably time to clear out those voices and get some new voices in your life. For sure.
When the two of you look back, I mean, you've had so much history together, and significant history. You two have been through some things. How has this history shaped you both in your relationship with one another, and then also in your faith?
Well, I will say, in regards to that really difficult moment when it completely almost, fell apart, and his decision to come back home and for us to start working, all of that was yucky and really hard to work through. But when you get on the other side of something like that, it actually gives you a confidence, because you think, if we can get through that, as nasty as that was and gross and all of that, then we can get through anything. So it actually builds a confidence in you when you're able to get to the other side of it. It's just the getting to the other side of it that's the hard part. But man, it does. You feel like there's a confidence there, and it builds just like a level of trust and intimacy that wasn't there before. Obviously, there was a level of knowing that wasn't there before, because we weren't keeping a lot of secrets anymore. We were exposing who we really were to each other, and what we were really thinking, and what we were really feeling. And there's a level of intimacy that actually comes with that. And there's definitely a level of confidence when you get to the other side of that, of, we can make it through anything. We're set. Not that you're taking that for granted, of, thinking that you're, have no vulnerabilities, but it definitely gives you confidence. And in regards to faith, I mean, I don't know. There's something about, just cleaning the slate and holding the Bible as the ruler, and everything gets measured about that also builds a level of confidence, because it matches the word, right? And you know that. And so you're building your life on something that is real and authentic, and it's not just, this person comes in with this idea, and this person comes in with this idea, and this person makes this rule because they have a weakness in a certain area. There's none of all of this, all this messy. It's just this solid thing that you're building your life on, and you're being so intentional about that. And so it brings confidence. And I've discovered in the process that God is trustworthy, and it's actually my most favorite thing about him, and my most favorite characteristic of God, that he's trustworthy. And Matt can say that, because I talk about it all the time. He knows that's how I feel. But it does create a faith in you. And when we got a little bit down the road, I will say, just to kind of finish out the rest of the story of our actual complete exit from this, we moved to Florida in 2005 for a job for Matt. And that was a big change for us, but we found a church down here that was within that CHM umbrella. And we started attending there, and we were there a few years, and several things happened that reminded us of the church that we had come out of, my grandfather's church, of things starting to become more of a controlling thing again, and just getting all down in people's business about little things. And then there were secrets, and there was stuff happening there that reminded us so much of the church that we had came out of. And we decided, right, it took a little bit, but we decided that we were going to exit that, because we had already experienced a church like that. We had already walked out of a church like that, and we weren't going to go down that path again. And so it was a very difficult exit, I will say, because that church was tied to a mission organization, and that is where Matt worked. So when we walked away from that church, we were giving up his job. Our house was tied to his job, so we were giving up our house. He had a vehicle through that job. We were giving up the vehicle. All of our kids, and we had 4 boys at that time. We now have 5 because we had a surprise, a very, very big surprise. But at that time, 4 boys, and we had access to, private education for them through a Christian school at a discounted rate because of his job, and we walked away from all of that. And so for us to make our exit from the conservative holiness movement completely and cut that tie, we had to walk away from a house, a vehicle, a job, and he was the primary caregiver for our family. So when we walked away from that job, we were walking away from all the money that you need to take care of 4 kids. And and so, I mean, you talk about a step of faith. That was, I think, one of the biggest steps of faith that we've ever made in our entire life, because we were where we had walked away before. Originally, when I was growing up in my grandfather's church, we walked away from a belief system in terms of the people and this control and all this kind of stuff. But he still had his job. We still had, when this walk away happened, it meant that we were walking away from a lot of things in the physical, not just in the emotional, not just in the spiritual. We were changing every single thing about our life. And definitely, I think the biggest step of faith that we've ever made. But I will say that it was a pretty easy step to make, because we had seen the chaos that we had grown up in, and we knew we didn't want to go back to that. And we also, because we had built such just a confident, we're going to follow scripture about things. We're going to follow God. It built such a confidence that we knew it was a big step, and it was like I'm not denying that, but we made it confidently, because we felt that God was moving with us, that He was directing us, and we knew that we were building our lives according to the Word of God. And when you're doing that, it just gives you you walk in confidence. You walk in confidence. You do. Even in really scary places, you walk in confidence.
Yeah, I think, when we were younger and did what we had to do, it actually opened up our eyes to the fact that you could see things a lot more clear as you went from that point on. We could see things a lot more clear. In other words, if somebody was trying to manipulate or trying to preach something in the pulpit, I mean, we would catch it quick. Where before we were like, oh, okay, it's like, hang on, whoa, that's not scripturally sound. That's not even remotely close. That's even if you take a scripture out of context, you couldn't do that. I mean, it was not even in the ballpark of biblical views. So doing this, but I must say, even that, it took a year. I'll never forget. It took us 1 year, almost to the day, to finally just go, you know what, this is what we got to do, because
that process of leaving wasn't us being scared to leave for ourselves. It was actually because we were connected to pieces within the ministry, Matt specifically, where he was doing things that were meaningful, and he was connected to people teaching, and he was walking away from that was the harder part. It wasn't because we were scared about what the church was going to do, but he was so connected to his ministry, and his heart was so in it, that to walk away from that was hard.
And God actually brought other ministries into our life, even during that year, that fed us, that allowed us to be able to step out of that with grace and strength and confidence.
Right.
And I will say, down through the years, one of the great things about being able to have the confidence to step into this, has grown our family so close together. Like she
Mm-hmm.
says, we have 5 boys and we have a very, very close family. We're
Me
very
too.
open about our relationship with Christ. We're very open with our children. Our children feel like they can be open back to us. And I will always be grateful every time the enemy tries to come and bring doubt and go, well, what if, because I was told when we were ready to leave during that year, they said, Matt, you have charisma, you're able to speak in front of people, you're able to do all this. We see you being the denominational leader. You are going to, we're planning on great things
You're
for
going
you.
places.
Yeah. And you're going to throw all this away. And I'm like, well, actually, I'm not throwing anything away. And so stepping out of that, realizing that my family is more important than any role. My family is more important than any job. And yeah, it was scary, but it was amazing how God opened the door to so many uh, new things and different things into a great church and to help us to see that He had a purpose and plan for us, that we didn't have to rely on others to make it another day, but we could actually rely on Him, and He was going to see
He
us
did
through.
direct
Yeah,
our paths.
He
He
did.
absolutely did
That's right.
direct our paths every single step. And I can look back and just see it so clearly. He opened this door and he opened this door. And so then we got this house and then you got this job and then you got, and just every single detail of our life clicked into place. And then he's opened so many doors for us since then. We live a life now that I would have never imagined back in the mountains of South Carolina all those years ago, sitting in a church parking lot, feeling like I was going to throw up. The things that God has allowed us to be a part of. And He's allowed, both of us now to step into full-time ministry positions. And several of our children are a part of full-time ministry, and just the life that we have and the family that we have. And that's another thing that they kind of, that note that was put in my mailbox, your children are going to go to hell. And their blood is going to be on your hands. And, you're talked to as if your whole family is doomed if you make a step outside of these organizations. And it is going to be a refining process, because, as I said, difficult times are revealing. And so when you're stepping out of that and you're having to dig down into what you really believe, and you're having to do that with another person, that there's going to be difficulty in that. But you don't have to be scared of it, because on the other side of it, you could have 30 years of marriage, ministry, family that's amazing. It's just, it doesn't always have to go the gloom and doom route that we're told in those things.
Yeah, it's not the death
doom
sentence that they make it out to be. Yeah, it can feel like it for a period of time, but
yes, right.
Yeah, it can end up very healthy, and it is ultimately healthier. And I think, you look back and you go, well, I'm sad that I don't have those friends anymore. But truly, you realize, well, they were friends because you did everything they told you to do. That was the fair weather.
And
friend,
is that really friends?
Is that really friends?
Is that really friends? If they have to think exactly like you and feel exactly like you,
we can no longer be your friend because you don't believe this, and I think it's very sad because they actually missed out on the blessing of being able to be a part of what all that God has done with us as well. So it's very sad.
It's a very real thing. Like I want to acknowledge it's a very real thing that some of those like family roles and family relationships are not what they were before and will probably never be.
It is very sad.
And so you can have gaps in your life where you feel like a mom gap, a dad gap, for your kids, a grandparent gap.
So funny. That's exactly how I've thought about it in my life, is there's gaps and then it's okay. And sometimes the gaps get filled, but I don't have every gap filled. I'll be honest about that.
But I will say in regards to family, that God has given my kids people who love them so good. They have people who fill a grandparent gap in their life that they have, and fill it beautifully. God has gifted them with that. And I know He's gifted me with somebody who is, she loves me as if she birthed me, and she's the first person I call if I'm in a struggle. If I need prayer, it's like she's on speed dial because I know she's praying about any situation that I'm stepping into. And so those gaps can be a real thing, but I don't think you have to fear them always being empty. And it may take time to get to, it did take time for us to get to the place where those gaps were filled. It wasn't like it happened immediately as soon as we stepped out. And but God, somehow or the other, he fills in all of that and he makes up for those spaces. And sometimes he gives us people and just sometimes he gives us the gift of his presence and his word, but he fills the gaps. And so I want to acknowledge that they're real, but I also want to acknowledge that God helps you manage that. And it doesn't always just feel like this huge empty space in your life. He fills it with people or his presence, and it's enough. It's enough.
And it's a great feeling. It's a great feeling to every day know that you're living an authentic life.
Right.
You're not. You don't have anything to hide. You don't have to wake up every day going, "Oh my goodness, did I do something?"
You can read their digest.
Did I do something yesterday? Yeah. Did I do something yesterday that's going to offend? And somebody in my family or anything like that. It's a good feeling to be able to wake up every day knowing that I am living out the calling and purpose that God has placed on my life. And as a result of that, Tracy is able to live out the calling and purpose that God has placed on her life. And as a result of that, my children under our umbrella are able to live out the calling and purpose on their life. And they're able to see the goodness of God. They didn't have to live through a lot of things that we had to live through. And
Lord.
We're not perfect. We're still working
people.
through things. We're still
we argue and we're just people.
We spiritually discern some things between each other.
We're real people, and we have real problems and real things that we disagree about. But man, there's something about like these defining moments that just gives a strength to your relationship. And then, like I said, when you are fully rooted in God's word, it gives you so much confidence. And the other thing that it does is it separates your perspective from when you're in those environments, you are always doing this internal, do I need to do this? What am I doing wrong here? What is going on here? I need to change this. Oh my goodness. I think I just, I was taught if you glanced at the TVs when you walked by the electronics section in Walmart that you were committing a sin. And so, you're so focused on not committing a sin and not messing up. It's such an inward focus. And when you get out of that and you work through that stuff, you're able to have an outward focus. And God has given us that. We're able to love people and care for people where they're at in their point of need. And we're able to be the hands and feet of Jesus in people's lives. And we're not isolated, just a few of us in this little thing. And we're all just the few there be that find it. We're reaching out and we're loving people. And God he's just expanded, our view and our ability to love and care and all of these things so much. It's so much bigger than I ever would have imagined. But the outward focus is really, really a good thing. It's not this internal constant, what am I doing to mess up? What am I doing to mess up? It's how can I love people today? It's a totally different mindset in every single day to wake up every morning and think about how can I care for people today than to think, what am I going to do today that may mess everything up? If I commit a sin, I have to connect immediately to God and confess, and I've just got to make sure that everything is okay between and does God really love me? I don't think that and I've got all these secrets, and it's just a completely different mindset.
Well, it's a burden
in the very best way.
I said that earlier. It's a burden nobody should have to bear,
right?
And so many people are walking around with burdens that are not. It's not guilt of sin. It's burdens of manipulation. It's burdens of humiliation, and nobody should have to walk around it. The Bible says, "Who the Son sets free is free indeed," and we should be able to walk in the freedom of knowing that Jesus is our Savior. Jesus is our friend, and He's going to lead, guide, and direct us. And we can look to the Bible as our roadmap, and we don't have to struggle with knowing who He is. And what's that song that says, I'm glad that I'm not struggling to be free. I'm free to struggle. And the first time I heard that, I'm like, what? And then I thought, that is so awesome.
That's a really good line.
That as a Christian, I can be free to struggle. Jesus says, listen, it's okay.
Stuff.
I'm with you. I'm never going to leave you nor forsake you. And I will tell you that it is worth it. I look back and the pain of walking away, it was a season where I thought I was going to die. I was like, we can't do this. How in the world? But through it, I knew deep down inside, this is what we were supposed to do as a family. And today it is worth it. I was just sitting here thinking when she was talking about the gaps. And, my mother passed 2 years. 2 years. And there was always that unique relationship, because she would like, Matt, I just wish you would dig deeper. If you would just dig deeper, her favorite saying was, take another dip. If you just take another dip, you would be able to get really cleansed, and
you get really baptized next time.
Yeah.
Just
and
one more time.
She don't realize how painful that was. But anyway, but I was just thinking of a lady that comes to our church. She was 76 years old. We do a lot of servicing in the community, and she came and started helping out. Wasn't a Christian, didn't go to church at all. 76 years old. I invited her to church, befriended her for 6 months. And she said, you're the craziest person I've ever met. When she found out I was a pastor, she's like, I've never met a pastor like you. I was like, thank you. Thank you. That is the biggest compliment anybody could ever give me, is I'm unlike any other pastor. But I just kept inviting her, and we just loved on her. And she came to church, and she accepted Christ. And I'll never forget, she come to me a few weeks later. She says, Pastor, would it be possible for me to have a Bible? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I went back and I gave her a Bible, and we actually took a picture together because, just to memorialize that moment. And she was like, so now what do I do with it? She said, is it like a regular book? Do I just start at the front? Do I read through it? What do I do? I've never read the Bible before ever in my entire life. And in that moment, I was thinking, what if Tracy and I hadn't made that decision to say, God, we're going to do what you want us to do, not what other people want us to do. What if we would have just said, forget it, and stuck it out? Or we would have our marriage would have been dissolved, and we would have went our separate ways because we hadn't dealt with our anger and bitterness and all the stuff. We would have missed out on that moment.
Oh, we would have missed out on so much.
That's just one of hundreds and thousands.
Y'all, you have shared some incredibly powerful statements in this of what y'all have come through, what you have learned. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for your willingness to be transparent in that big question I asked, of how hard did it get? How bad did it get? Because there are couples out there, and you two know this, they're in it and they're like, we don't know if it's possible to come through it. And so to be able to hear from people who are willing to say, yeah, this is how bad it was, and hear what you have learned from it and where you're at now, I just pray that that really does speak to them and that God speaks to them through it. So again, thank you for your courage and your willingness to be transparent and vulnerable with those who are going to watch this. I really appreciate it.